All right, what is going on, everybody? We're back. Tim Berzins, myself, Trent McCloskey from Train Eat Live, Amplified Metabolism. And today we wanted to go on and touch on the importance of having really good blood flow, mainly for nutrient oxygen delivery to your body, different cells, also good blood flow to like your extremities, like your hands and feet, and also going to be tying that into like working out and all the importance of really good circulatory health. So what's going on, Tim? How you doing, man?
Doing well. I think it's a good topic to talk about.
Definitely.
I think a lot of people think about blood flow. The main areas that people think about it are pretty much working out.
hmm
Um,
Like getting the pump
ma-
and everything in the gym. Yeah,
Getting the pump. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's the subsect of people interested in blood flow for bedroom reasons.
definitely,
Which
for
is
sure.
connected to all of this stuff in the same way. And I'll connect that by saying a healthy organism will have no problem achieving an erection, for example, in the bedroom,
hmm
because a healthy organism is in an abundant state where like reproduction can happen, et cetera, et
hmm
cetera.
hmm
A scarce, an organism that's like during famine or during a scarcity time won't want to reproduce because it doesn't want offspring during a time when there's not food available.
hmm
So then your reproductive capacity goes down, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
I think we're not necessarily going to be specifically talking about that. We're really talking about more about the metabolic effects of blood flow
hmm
and like nutrient delivery and oxygen delivery, because if your blood flow is poor, then you're not going to be getting the nutrients and the oxygen to the cells that you need to be getting to the cells.
Definitely. And a little note there, because again, I think that's a whole different, conversation on like erections and bedroom stuff and all that. But if you are in a place where you're suffering from that, I think it's either two things. It's like a lot, like nowadays, like the I don't know, societal pressures, and you could be very much in your head. But if you are in a state of health where you're having trouble with issues like that, this is going to be related to that because it all starts here, right? And if your health is in that kind of state where, say, maybe you're crash dieting or from any other stresses or whatever it may be, and your health is in that state and you're struggling there, again, we're covering the bases first, and we're going to save more of that conversation with maybe more tips and tricks about that later. But like this is the basis of it, right? So if you start making improvements here with what we're about to share, then it's going to all translate into that. So
Hmm.
don't be
Definitely.
upset. We're not talking about everything specifically in the bedroom right now, but it's all building the foundation essentially.
Definitely, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And that's really these first few episodes. We've been intentionally trying to keep it a little bit more broad because we want to hit all the bases that we can, and really build that foundation for you guys to understand this, because there's so much to understand. There's
hmm
like so much going on, and some of the details can be really, really interesting, but they can also be very niched and not necessarily something that everyone's interested in, or that really will solve like your problem, your specific health problem. But if
hmm
you get a good enough understanding of how the body works, then it starts to become plain as day what's happening in your body
hmm
when something goes wrong. And
hmm
so obviously if you're at that foundational level, if you know the essence of the problem, it's easy to fix. The only issues arise when you don't know what the essence of the problem is, and so
hmm
now you're in a state of confusion. That's it. That's really
Yes.
all it is. Like health mysteries, it's just about figuring out what the essence of the problem is and solving it from the foundational base level, and not from the symptom level, from
hmm
the outer
Yeah.
level.
I like how you really said like bringing the awareness to it, because it's like whenever we say problems, these are problems that a lot of everyday people face. Like some common ones of like trouble sleeping, fatigue, low energy, even like lower libido, sex drive, all that stuff. So it's like you have to come and understand where the body is working, because like a lot of, especially like in this Western, I know we talked about this in like the first episode we did on like the view of medicine of just, okay, slap a band-aid on it, but if the cut's infected, that's going to cause a numerous amount of problems. It's not actually not being fixed. We
Mhm.
are aiming to actually dive in like what is going to fix that infected cut so your body is actually healthy. Then it solves all those issues of like losing that stubborn body fat, building muscle with ease, having energy throughout the day, sleeping like a baby, and just improving that quality of life on a whole, essentially.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And what did I do here? Sorry, my
You're good.
screen moved for a second. And I think to really start to dive into this is understanding the difference between nitric oxide and carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
So most people who are talking about blood flow in mainstream nutrition are talking about nitric oxide, because it is
Yes.
a vasodilator. It'll expand your blood vessels and allow more blood to be pumped through. Whenever we look at like pre-workout supplements that are specifically designed to increase blood flow, they're all, arginine based, or what is it, L-citrulline? That's one of them too, I think.
Yes. And most people are coming out of one that. Yeah, most people are coming, like they probably heard nitric oxide before, probably from pre-workouts.
Yeah, exactly. And so the basic idea is if we can get more nitric oxide, we can get bigger pumps in the gym. And some people think that translates into more muscle growth. Some people think it translates into better workouts. Sometimes it's just you like the feel of it. From what I've seen, I don't necessarily think it's going to help with muscle growth unless you're specifically doing a high rep training. And the reason that it would is because with high rep training, nutrient delivery is more important. So if you're doing a set that in the weight room that doesn't last more than 10 to 15 seconds, you're not going to move out of the creatine phosphate energy system, which is basically the stored energy you have ready to go. But if you're doing a set that lasts like a minute or 90 seconds, minute and a half, that's enough time that the blood flow to your muscles is important, because you need to get the oxygen and the nutrients there to replenish what's being burned so that you can keep working. So in that sense, if you're taking the nitric oxide or the supplement that boosts nitric oxide, getting more nutrients and more oxygen to your muscles while you're doing a high rep set, then you could theoretically perform more reps, perform better, and then therefore affect more muscle growth in that sense. So if high rep training, it could work. I think the question we want to address is that really the best way to go about it?
Exactly. And that's why I was very curious to hear your thoughts on this, because that all makes sense, right? More blood, more nutrients to the muscles. But that's why we want to touch on why nitric oxide supplements could very much be hurting your health, and what to actually put your focus on more to then in turn, build more muscle, but not even that, just improve your health from a general standpoint.
Well, I think it'll help to start with muscle, with exercise. That's what I want to say. Because if you think about how nitric oxide plays with exercise, and then use that as a framework to understand how nitric oxide functions within the body, I think it'll start to make a lot of sense. So really what I mean by that is exercise is a stressor. And when your body, when your muscle is getting stressed out from this stressor, from this exercise that you're doing, it's going to increase nitric oxide locally, meaning within the muscle that is being stressed, so that it can expand the blood vessels and get more nutrients and oxygen into the stressed muscle in a localized place. So that's basically what's happening whenever we have nitric oxide happening in other areas of the body, is that it's a localized response based on a stress that is happening that the body's trying to overcome. So right there, nitric oxide and stress, those two are related. Nitric oxide happens because there's a stressor happening in the body.
Yeah. Isn't there, correct me on like the side details of this, like whenever somebody has a heart attack, isn't there like a huge release of nitric oxide localized like around the heart and everything? Yeah. So again, that's a pretty stressful situation. That is like the body's resort to like quickly get something working again if it's under that stress, essentially.
Right. And so I'll refer back to I think it was in the first episode we did. We had talked a little bit about this idea that we were talking about cortisol, and we were talking about how cortisol is not a bad hormone. It's when it's out of balance that we get unwanted side effects. So if all the protective steroid hormones, the pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, DHT, like if all of those are high and healthy and protective, and your thyroid is high and healthy and protected, then the cortisol is going to do what it is supposed to do. And then when it's done, cortisol will shut off, and your body will quickly adapt back to where it's supposed to be in that healthy state, because the context of the situation is such that cortisol isn't deranging the whole system. If all the steroid hormones are low, then cortisol is going to have a bad effect. So what I want to say here is that nitric oxide can act similarly to cortisol in that sense, where it's contextually based. If you have a high metabolism state where your body is producing lots of carbon dioxide from the respiratory metabolism, then a little boost in nitric oxide isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. It has an effect. It has a purpose, but it will quickly return back to the healthy state because the carbon dioxide, the context of the high carbon dioxide will take care of the bigger picture, I guess is how I want to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And relating this like back to exercise, that's why how I see it, like exercise, kind of more so involving cardio exercise, it should always be enjoyable. Whenever you pass that point where it's like really struggling to keep up with, again, most kind of see this as like maybe more athletes and professional athletes and things like that. Like they push that pain threshold, which again, like there is some truth to like pushing yourself to get stronger. But talking about it here, it's like, if you're pushing your body past what it can handle and your body can't handle it, that's going to be more of a stressor. Because I think most people don't look at exercise, and then they forget about like, crash dieting be a huge stressor on your body, and they keep pushing down that road more and more and more just to try to get a six pack or something like that, bigger muscles, but it actually ends up working against them. So if you can operate in there where your body can actually handle the stressors you put on it, recover from that, that's when you get the win-win and actually progress and reach your goals and just, healthier state of body, everything.
And especially with cardio, because if you're exercising above your lactate threshold, that is the biggest metabolic stressor because you're running almost entirely off the glycolytic system. Now, again, in a healthy organism, that's not a problem. You can bounce back from that. But if you're in a low metabolic state, the last thing you want to do is something that's going to be just flooding your body with lactic acid because you already have too much of it. You already have too much lactate in the blood because of using the glycolytic metabolism, the stress metabolism more than you should. Whereas like if you're the stressor from lifting a heavy weight, for example, is heavily dependent on the structures of the proteins in the muscles and, those being repaired. If you're doing a low intensity cardio, that is more endurance based. It's more based on the mitochondria and the angiogenesis of new blood vessels, the creation of new blood vessels into muscles so that it can supply the endurance. But it's that middle range where you're in the lactate threshold. That's where you're producing tons and tons of lactic acid, and basically and so like endurance athletes and sprinter athletes will do this where they're like training in that really unbearable zone in the lactate above the lactate threshold because they're trying to get their body able to handle lactate better, to be able to clear it better. And again, in a healthy organism, that's great. I know Dr. Raymond Peat, who was a guy that we follow a lot of the basis. He's the founder, like the originator of the bioenergetic field. So a lot of the information we talk about here is connected to a lot of his stuff. But like, we'll take our own takes on it and our own view on the research. But I know he almost doesn't like any exercise. Right. I think he doesn't like anything that is going to really put a stressor on the body at all. Whereas I tend to think that the stress is not necessarily a bad thing as long as it is within the context of a healthy organism.
Right. You can actually recover from it. And again, like that kind of goes back into like nowadays, it's like people are just putting way too much stress on themselves and not able to actually recover from it because they're coming at it. They're just not, doing things that are going to support it. They're literally just more stress from like dietary stress and also like stress from work and environmental stress and even behavioral stress. There's so many other things that it kind of pushes that threshold a little bit further. And then people wonder why they're having all these repercussions because of that, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. But so to get back to, I guess, the basis of this video talking about nitric oxide is that what we really want is a high carbon dioxide situation. You can almost think of carbon dioxide and nitric oxide having the same blood flow enhancing effects, but carbon dioxide being systemic and nitric oxide being local. So like you said, a heart attack, nitric oxide will flood the heart. You do a set in the gym, the nitric oxide will flood the muscle. Right. So it's about increasing the blood flow in that specific area. You're in the bedroom, that's a stressor that's a form of a stressor. You get localized blood flow to the area. Whereas carbon dioxide is going to increase blood flow throughout your entire body. In a high thyroid state where you're producing lots of carbon dioxide, your hands and feet will be warm because the blood flow will be expanded out as far as it can to all portions of the body. You'll be full of blood. Whereas when you're in the adrenaline state, which is characterized, also the stress state, which is characterized by high estrogen, high prolactin, and usually high nitric oxide,
Mm-hmm.
what you'll see is that the blood vessels constrict on your hands and your feet in order to keep the blood in the main portions of the body where it's really needed in order to function.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm excited to actually move a little bit further. I know you said you want to chat on like minerals in the body too, especially in that I want to talk about like actually your body like excreting all those minerals whenever you're in that stress state. So we'll save that for another topic. But yeah, what I was going to add to that is, in a sense, getting more oxygen to the body, right? And whenever I first started learning about this, I thought like, okay, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out CO2. Like CO2, it's not needed, right? But you actually, I think it's the Bohr effect, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whereas like
Bohr
if you want to, what's that? Haldane.
The Bohr and Haldane, I can't remember which one's which, but one of them is about letting oxygen into the cell, and one of them is about letting oxygen into the lungs. I think Bohr is the lungs and Haldane is the cell, but either way.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, regardless, it's the idea of like, if you want to get oxygen to like say the brain in the body, you need to have that swap of CO2 and O2. Essentially, you need to have that transition. So having more CO2, which will actually amount to more oxygen, being able to get to that body part or organ or whatever.
Yeah. And that's actually I think the next two topics that we have planned to talk about are like, it's hard to separate them because they're all really connected.
Yeah.
Because like the carbon dioxide here is really important. The main driver of carbon dioxide is thyroid hormone, because the thyroid hormone is going to be basically like a central regulator of your metabolism. And the reason it has that effect is there's so many facets to it. It's kind of hard to just pick one, but the thyroid itself will increase respiration from the cell. It basically signals the cell that we're in an abundant state. We're in a relaxed state. You can use the energy to repair and relax and adapt, basically. But it's also responsible for all the steroid hormones, which are protective and have all the good effects. And just from that zoomed out perspective, it's really getting your body into that high metabolism, healthy, warm, high blood flow, relaxed state. And thyroid hormone is kind of like an indicator of that. I think too many people can sometimes get lost in the number in trying to like increase thyroid or increase something and not think about like what's the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to get the body into a healthy state. Is it accomplishing that? If what you're doing is not accomplishing that, then change it up.
Right. Exactly. Which kind of relates to what we were just talking about with the liver too, relating to the thyroid as well. Because again, they're all connected, right? If your liver isn't converting the thyroid hormones properly, that's also going to impact your, blood flow in a sense. Yeah.
And so like, I know there's a lot of recommendations around like, especially in the bioenergetic field, to maybe eat more L-lysine, which is nitric oxide is created from the amino acid L-arginine, and lysine competes with arginine. So when you take L-lysine, you decrease the levels of arginine and therefore decrease the production of nitric oxide. I don't necessarily think that that's necessary or wanted or beneficial, because like I said, nitric oxide is not a bad thing. It's just that it needs to be placed within the proper context. And just blanketedly trying to decrease it, I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go about it.
Yeah, exactly. I would say I think people get caught up in trying like, oh, okay, blood flow or having a good workout, they try to boost nitric oxide as a whole, thinking that will improve certain aspects of their thing, as opposed to like, for example, having a great workout. It's like different things will factor into that, actually having like sufficient B vitamins, sufficient minerals, which again, they're all connected, like, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, all those stuff too, that actually involve, your muscles and working out. So I think it's more so it's like getting back to that foundation that you're not necessarily trying to boost nitric oxide. It's good, but only whenever it's needed. It's like trying to boost it is like the wrong way you're looking at things in a sense.
Right, exactly. And I think that a big part of that too is also the short term drop in nitric oxide might be a kickstart that would be beneficial for your metabolism, because we've talked about how it's always in a spiral. So it's these positive or negative feedback loops that basically the nitric oxide will decrease the production of carbon dioxide, therefore creating more nitric oxide, which therefore decreases the carbon dioxide. So it's this back and forth cycle. And if you can decrease nitric oxide temporarily so that you produce more carbon dioxide, then now you've risen this spiral up to a higher level. And now you don't necessarily, now you can allow nitric oxide to come up when it needs to come up, because now carbon dioxide is in that higher state. So if you need to kickstart yourself out of it, I can see that. But I don't think that it's like a long-term strategy to constantly try to always decrease like the stress hormones and nitric oxide and things like that. You do need those. It just has to be within the proper context.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like, for instance, like I don't take any like more generic pre-workouts anymore for that main reason. And like my workouts have still been great. If anything, like I don't even take any pre-workouts other than like the coffee I have hours prior. And like now I guess it is like, if someone taking a lot of pre-workouts and then switching, it's probably going to feel different. But once I think you bring yourself more into like that healthy state, your workouts will become much more better. And you can actually feel like you're still pushing yourself just as effectively without that, like, oh, I need my pre-workout to kind of get through that, in a sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of more
and, you know,
regulated in a way.
From my experience, I'll talk about from my experience for a little bit, is that in the high carbon dioxide state, which is to say in the high metabolism state, there's a difference in the way that you recover from sets in the gym. So like if you do a high rep set that creates a lot of lactic acid and nitric oxide, you get that big pump in your muscle. Well, that can either lock up your muscle and basically like you're done. Like that muscle's not really going to do much, you know, anymore. But, or in the high carbon dioxide state, in the high metabolism state, it flushes so much quicker that you can actually go back and recover between sets. You know, we're not only talking about recovery between workouts, but we're actually talking about like between sets within a single workout. You can actually get back at it faster, because the high carbon dioxide environment that the nitric oxide and the lactic acid are springing up in, that context naturally will recover it back down quicker. Whereas if you're in that low metabolism state, then that high lactic acid and high nitric oxide has no context in which to get to clear it. You know what I mean? And so it stays high, and then it basically keeps your body in a stress state and doesn't allow recovery.
Exactly. Yeah. And then usually, I mean, just taking that a little bit further, it's like people usually combine that, which then crash dieting, which again, I like the analogy, you just keep digging yourself a deeper and deeper hole. Whereas like you think you're all of a sudden going to end up on like this side of, you know, super health and feeling amazing, high energy. But like, I always like look at it the way, like you need to kind of build your body up into how you want it to look and feel, as opposed to like the mainstream fitness industry approach, which I know you're, especially your story of like, super crash dieting, but also like playing the drums and like just like only on like 1,000 calories a day. It's like you're not all of a sudden just going to spring into health and, you know, feel great and have energy and sleep amazing. It's like you keep digging yourself a hole in that way. So it's almost like just flipping that perspective.
I think whenever we do a episode dedicated to fat loss or muscle gain or something like that, we'll get more into that. But there was a time when I was training so hard. It was a summer, and I was training so hard. I was literally I would go like surfing or skimboarding in the morning, then go to the gym and either do like a heavy weight session or like an intense sprint session that was basically a lactate threshold training. And then at night go and play drums, you know, the most active instrument, play drums in a band, loading heavy equipment before and after, while having like some alcohol, while dieting on like 1,000 calories. And like, if there's a way that you want to like trash your metabolism, that's it. Like,
do that right there. There's the outline for sure. Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, definitely, I would like to have like a full blown episode related to those two, because, but again, at the same time, these are again like the foundations that we're building upon that are going to allow you to not only have great fitness results, but also life results as well.
Yeah. And so I think one other point I really want to get into with nitric oxide before we close out here is how it has the effect of lowering your metabolism. And also to start with that, I want to kind of go into a different approach that I've kind of been taking as far as not only supplementation, but also diet experiments and things like that. And that is, before I used to think like, okay, this thing is good, that means I should take it all the time. And I mean, I remember we had a supplement cabinet that would, you know, shatter some minds. It was like there was so many bottles. And there was a while that like we were taking a lot of different supplements, and the thinking being of the mindset of like, well, this is good, so we should take it, and this is good, so we should take it, and this is good, so we should take it. Now I'm so off of supplements to the point that it's very minimal that I'll take them. And if I do, it's more of a short-term thing to kind of, like I said, kickstart your metabolism up to that higher gear, or to use it as like on the fly when you need it, based on like if you had a really stressful situation,
Right.
that you can take a little bit of extra something. And the reason that this can be helpful for nitric oxide, which is what we were just saying about like taking L-lysine or taking using methylene blue or using red light, which I think we need to discuss as well, is how nitric oxide, the way that nitric oxide lowers your metabolism. This is like my favorite phrase to say because it sounds so cool. When we're talking about red light, well, okay, I'll get to that in a second. Basically, nitric oxide will bind to cytochrome C oxidase in the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain is the very last section of the respiratory metabolism, where you actually transfer the electrons between water and oxygen from the breakdown to create NAD and NADH, that whole system basically. Cytochrome C oxidase is the rate limiting enzyme that is required for that process to happen. Nitric oxide will bind and inactivate the cytochrome C oxidase so that the respiratory metabolism basically gets shut down. And it does this irreversibly, meaning that in order to get the respiratory metabolism going again, you have to create new cytochrome C oxidase. And
which
so
methylene blue red light helps do that.
Exactly. So normally that'll take like a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. And that's where it's really important. That's where maybe lowering nitric oxide temporarily can help knock you into that higher state. But so you just mentioned methylene blue and nitric oxide, and red light. And so the phrase that I love saying is that red light photodissociates nitric oxide from cytochrome C in the electron transport chain, because that sounds so cool to say, because it's so many big words strung together, and yet it makes perfect sense. Like when you understand it, you're like, oh, okay, that I get that. Yeah.
Exactly. So looking at it, some takeaways, I would definitely say I would drop the pre-workout if someone listens to that is taking some pre-workout, especially with arginine. I think that could definitely help. If you haven't been getting sunlight, you don't necessarily have to go out and buy a red light device just yet, but getting actual exposure to sunlight, at least 20 to 30 minutes a day, no sunscreen. If you're longer than that, then maybe a good healthy sunscreen with no like bad toxins in it will be beneficial.
Honestly, coconut oil works really well for that. It's a little counterintuitive because you would think that oil will make you burn more. It does give you more color, but but coconut oil is so antioxidant and antimicrobial, and actually it has a little bit of an SPF effect on its own.
Yeah.
And so it crispens you. It doesn't burn you.
Exactly, which is my favorite. I also know a brand, side note, like Badger Sports, I believe, that has like a zinc oxide. Like that's the only active ingredient, when then just like some other, I forget what the other ingredients are, but it's only like 3 other ones, which is a good alternative than like most of them, which just has a ton of just junk in it you're putting onto your skin that's just going to absorb. So
yeah.
But yeah, so again, it's like getting that light exposure, maybe cutting the pre-workouts if it has a ton of arginine in there. What else would you say are some good takeaways to kind of get that balance back? Because again, we're trying to, and then moving into the next episode perfectly, more CO2 production. What would you say to kind of make some last takeaways for this?
I think methylene blue is worth trying. I know when I used it, I probably overdosed it. I think actually less is better when it comes to methylene blue. There's like there's a sweet spot, and more doesn't necessarily mean better. I know a lot of people that have gotten really good effects from it, body heating up and stuff like that, because methylene blue will naturally decrease nitric oxide, and it also makes red light more effective because it stains the cell blue, and so it absorbs the red light more effectively. And so you can try any of those. If you take methylene blue and do some red light or do some sunlight, usually you'll notice some effects. Other than that, just keeping your metabolism high and not overdoing training if you're in a low metabolism state, keeping stress in balance. I mean, a lot of the recommendations we're going to have come back to keeping stress low.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think a lot of these things can actually come into whenever we're talking about CO2. Because I think the recommendations there will also work here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also want to stress that nitric oxide isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just when it's out of balance, that's when we run
Yes.
into
I
problems.
think this coming back to like whenever things get out of balance, that's whenever you're going to have the negative side effects, essentially.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
if it stays out of balance too long, that's whenever you have more of the negative side effects.
Yeah, and also knowing that carbon dioxide has the similar systemic effects that nitric oxide has, which is to say that it keeps blood flow enhanced and everything. If you're working out at the gym and you have your muscles full of blood because you are in a high carbon dioxide state, and then you have a boost of nitric oxide, you're going to get a lot of blood flow.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be great. You're going to have great pumps. But
Yeah.
if you don't have high carbon dioxide and then you release that nitric oxide, then you'll get a pump, but it won't be nearly as great because you don't have that double effect of like the
Right.
systemic and the local.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that there becomes a point when you hit exhaustion, which is kind of like when you don't get a pump at all, which is
Mm-hmm.
similar to like when men have trouble with erections, basically, is
Mm-hmm.
because you're so low on the nitric oxide, you've overdone it so much that you've hit the exhaustion stage where your carbon dioxide is so low from the context level, but you also are having a really hard time even producing enough nitric oxide to get the pump at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of the supplements, the pre-workout supplements, or like Viagra, which is a drug that increases nitric oxide.
Mm-hmm.
That's where those come in, because now you're trying to like compensate for this low nitric oxide by producing even more nitric oxide,
Right.
not realizing that that's not the problem. Nitric oxide is not the problem. The carbon dioxide is the problem. You don't have the ground in order to make it useful. So now you're just continuing to try to like pump this thing up while the ground keeps falling beneath you.
Mm-hmm. I really like how you mentioned it's almost like doing this, it's almost like taking the effort to fix issues if you've been struggling with those, because whenever you're in the gym, you kind of get like a win-win there because you already have high CO2 levels, and then you get that boost whenever it's needed in the gym because you're putting your body under that stress. Then you can easily recover from that. And what I've noticed is, like, especially lately, I've been getting like that, almost like that double boost, having amazing workouts and pumps in the gym, but also outside the gym. It's not that I'm like actually pumped up, but I feel more full because, again, like my blood flow is great. My hands and feet are always warm. I almost like feel more pumped up as opposed to like just cold and like as not like more thoroughly throughout the entire day, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's that carbon dioxide state.
Yeah.
The high carbon dioxide state.
Yeah. Which is a great state to be in.
It's a great state to be in.
Yes.
So I think that's probably good for all the stuff we were going to talk about with nitric oxide. Is there anything else you can think of that's
No, off the top of my head. I liked it though. It's good. It's good stuff.
It was good. So if you guys stay tuned, we'll be posting soon the next video of this series, which is going to be on specifically on carbon dioxide. So I think it'll be a good one.
Yeah. See you guys then. Cool.
Awesome.
Hey guys, what's going on? It is Tim here. I hope that you enjoyed that episode. We went into a lot of details around nitric oxide and carbon dioxide and blood flow. One little point I wanted to add in reviewing and editing the video was at the very end I was talking about how when you're in the exhaustion stage that that the attempts to increase nitric oxide are really counterproductive because your carbon dioxide levels from the context level are too low to really make the use of nitric oxide beneficial. And it occurred to me that what's really happening is that when your when your carbon dioxide is low, nitric oxide raises to try to compensate, but you start to become less sensitive to nitric oxide so that you need more and more and more and more of it. So it's not necessarily that you're failing to produce nitric oxide. It's actually that your nitric oxide is already very high. It's just that you're not sensitive to it because the context of the low CO2 is making you more or less and less sensitive to it. And that's why that a lot of people in the cancer state and the disease state, people who have libido issues and impotence issues, you'll notice in the blood screens that they have often high nitric oxide. So they're trying to take things like Viagra or taking like pre-workout muscle pumps to try to increase nitric oxide, not realizing that that they already have high nitric oxide. They're just not sensitive to it because they aren't producing energy properly through the respiratory metabolism, therefore not producing CO2 and therefore not being sensitive to nitric oxide. So I think that about covers that topic. Thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate your support, and we hope that you got a lot out of this. Please give us the thumbs up. Click that if you liked it. Please subscribe to the channel. The more subscriptions we can get, the more we can get this information out there, the more you can share this. If there's anybody who you think might enjoy this, or if you think that anyone on Facebook or the like would consider this information useful, then please go ahead and share it. I think with all of that, we're good to go. So stay tuned. We have some more videos coming out. We're going to try to keep producing as much content for you guys as possible. Leave comments if you have any questions or if you have any topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll continue the discussion on there. So hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.